All right. Welcome everybody to the second in our series of our B Corp Inclusion Challenge webinar series. I'm Heather Paulson with Heather Paulson Consulting, and I have Anna McGrath here as well with Wonderworks Consulting. And we are talking about B Corp supplier or client engagement and self-management practices today. So one thing we'd like to do this time is if everyone could, in the bottom of their screen, there's a place where you can open your chat window. And if we could have everyone type in their name and their location and maybe their company name, then we'll get an idea of everyone who is here. All right. Welcome, everybody. All right, so we have people on both sides and in the middle of the United States. And I think we're also going to have a few people from other countries join us as well today. So if you're just joining on, please put in the chat window your name and where you are and the name of your company, and then that'll help us have more of a conversation during today's webinar.
Great. And do you want to do any of the kind of norms, or shall I jump into my introduction?
I will do that now. And just to say, from the first webinar that we had in November, if anyone would like to stay on after we're done at 1 o'clock today, Anna and I will be available to talk about whether you tried to implement either of the homework options that we gave, and if you want to discuss those, feel free to stay on at 1 o'clock with us. So, all right, our norms and agreements for today. When you log in, you are automatically muted. Thank you again for posting your name and your location in the chat window. And you can also use the chat window to post comments or raise your hand to ask questions. We have Tanya from Wonderworks Consulting helping to monitor that activity as well. And we have a few polls during today's webinar too that we'll be using to interact with you as well. So that is our start. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and it's over to you, Anna.
Okay, great. So it's a pleasure having the opportunity to, as you say, have this second webinar with you. Anna McGrath, Wonderworks Consulting. And we really focus on conscious leadership skills. And today we're going to be talking, as Heather said, about some self-organizing practices. But the way I want to look at this is, it doesn't matter whether you're in a hierarchical organization, in an organization that is fully self-organizing, or somewhere in between. The work that we're going to talk about today is relevant. And the way we're going to look at it is we're going to look through the lens of decision-making, because the way I see decision-making is such a critical skill, because every time each one of us within an organization gets to make a decision, we get to learn, we get to grow. And if we don't have that ability, if decisions are actually made only by leaders, it really stifles people's ability to learn and grow, is my opinion. We also want to make sure that decision-making is optimal within the whole organization and with suppliers and clients, because it's the only way to truly be able to fully live the purpose that your organization has. So when I think about decision making, some of the questions that we're really going to explore today is, do you have clarity about who makes decisions? Like right now we've got Tanya makes all decisions that relate to polls. We might say, hey, we're ready. But she's got all of that handled. So on this call, we're really clear about who's got what decision-making authority. And we want the people who are actually doing the work making the decisions, not just supervisors and managers. We'll talk about how decisions are made, like what is the actual process of that a little bit, and then also when are people really just providing input, or when are they actually the part of the decision-making process? Because those are two very different ways to interact. And I think one of the big things we see in organizations is whether there's bottlenecks. You know, does that show up? And if there's a bottleneck, there's something there that needs to be resolved. So that's going to be one whole focus for today. And over to you, Heather. And you're muted.
Sorry. I always
Who's in charge of muting? I'm joking.
Unfortunately, it's me. So we're going to tie all that decision making in with a very specific area of supplier selection, or for those of us who are a service providing organization, we can apply these same principles to client selection as well. So our tie-in here is that I believe that maybe most of us are with certified B Corps. We'll have a poll in a minute to find out more about our audience. But if we are already certified B Corps, we've done an internal deep dive into our organization's operations to become certified B Corps. And so our next logical step might be to more fully examine the impact we have through our supplier and client selection processes. Because we really do need to be mindful about where we spend our limited resources, our money, our time, frustrations that may come from poor choices, that kind of thing. So just for a couple of definitions, I consider suppliers those companies from whom we purchase materials, supplies, or services. And clients would be those companies that purchase services or products from us. So both suppliers and clients take our energy, our focus, our attention, our time. They also generate an impact of their own out in the world. And so how do we maximize our positive impacts on our own workers, our communities, and the environment through being mindful about how we spend our resources? So before we launch into the meat of the presentation, Tanya, if you could launch our first poll to find out a little bit more about who's with us, that would be great. So are you an employee or an owner of a certified B Corp, a supplier to or a client of a certified B Corp, or maybe you're not affiliated with a certified B Corp, but you maybe would like to be, or none of the above? And we'll give a couple more seconds for the responses to come in. And when you have most everybody, Tanya, go ahead and post the results. All right. So 87% of us in the audience today are with a certified B Corp. That is great. And 4% would like to be. Welcome. We hope to make this an accessible journey for you. And none of the above, we hope to make this relevant for you as well. Let us know in the chat window if there's anything specific that we can address for you.
So without further ado, we have three gorgeous looking guys with us today. I hope I'm not going to have any comments to that, but we're really looking forward to not just speaking from our perspective, both Heather and myself, but having a chance to talk to three guys from WasteFarmers. So we've got John-Paul Maxfield, we've got John Orlando, and we've got Matt Gettelman. I had the pleasure of meeting two of them at the B Corp retreat earlier or later last year, should I say. And we got to talking about self-organizing. We've had a previous conversation, and we're on that journey together of adding self-organizing practices to kind of complement what WasteFarmers were already doing in that area and to maybe formalize it a little bit more. But I'd like all three of them to have an opportunity to introduce themselves. And I'll start off, John-Paul, do you want to say a little bit about WasteFarmers yourself, anything you'd like to share?
Sure. I would say beauty's in the eye of the beholder, so I appreciate that. Right back at you. I enjoyed meeting you so much, and so much of what you're doing resonated with the spirit of B Corp, the spirit of what we're trying to do. So really grateful to be on the call and to learn as part of the process. So WasteFarmers is a sustainable agriculture company, and broadly speaking, we started back in 2009 at a time when changing the world was very popular, and that's why we started. And we saw, changing food and agriculture as a way to realize some of that change. And so we're focused on building a better food and ag system as a company. My personal history is not very exciting.
I'm sure we'll get maybe a little bit more flavor as we dive into some questions during the this will be an interview as well as we'll be sharing some content. So over to John Orlando. We'll go in the John's directions first, and then we'll go over to you, Matt, afterwards. You can just jump in after John.
Sure. I guess I'm Director of Operations over here, and joined in 2013. So after we launched our soil products, and yeah, I think been part of a serious trajectory of rapid growth in the last 3 years, and super excited about that, and super excited to put some structure around it as we've grown. And I think that's hopefully what we'll talk a little bit about that too today. But just being able to add some structure as we grow to formalize decision making and put some, I guess, formality around things that when I first joined, at least, it was kind of second nature to work in a bit of a teal management structure. But as we grew it, we needed a little more structure around that. So, yeah.
Hey, everybody. Really excited to be on the call with you guys, and really excited to be working with WasteFarmers. So I am a new addition to the WasteFarmers team. I joined in November of last year. My background is in business. Recently graduated from an MBA program here in Boulder, Colorado, and did a little bit of consulting, financial consulting, before jumping on with John and John-Paul. And I guess I'll say off the bat that one of the main reasons that I wanted to work with WasteFarmers, besides knowing John and John-Paul for the last several years, was because of their B Corp status. And that was definitely one of the main driving factors in me wanting to work with them. And really just speaks to the values and the mission that they've sort of given to WasteFarmers as a company. My role currently is Director of Strategy and Growth for WasteFarmers. A lot of that has to do with implementing some of the systems that John Orlando was alluding to. And so I am also spearheading our teal management implementation, and working a lot with Anna to get WasteFarmers up and running into that system. So.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Matt. And there's kind of a few things, even just as we've kind of launched with your introductions, that I want to clarify for some of the audience members. So firstly, I want to say I've got some questions that I want to ask all three of John, John-Paul, and also Matt. But we also want your questions. So in the audience, if there's particular things that you're interested in, go ahead. I'm just going to remind you to type those in the chat window. We'll be scanning the chat window for that. So, and you can also raise your hand. So if you raise your hand, your audio mic will get opened by Tanya. And also you can add your camera as well and jump on the webcam at that point if you'd like. One of the things that I really knew that I really wanted to work with WasteFarmers when I saw that one of their values was take time for tea. So I hope I'm not, saying anything that, but tea is my lifeblood, and so definitely perfect fit there. There you go. I was going to say, but one of the things both of you mentioned teal, And I'm sure that the majority of the audience has an idea about what they think teal is. You know, much more progressive, much more, if you're familiar with integral theory, kind of the developmental stages of organizations and individuals, and how do you actually really evolve your practices. But maybe that would be the first question to take, John-Paul, is, could you say a little bit more about teal, just so that you could share your perspective of that?
Absolutely. I want to read our purpose statement because it'll make sense in this context. So we're cosmic journey people seeking solutions inspired by natural systems, human potential, and intuitive imagination with the intention of enhancing the biosphere, local communities, and one's authentic self. And as I think organically, we have organized throughout the company's history in what formerly we thought of as organic chaos. And in reading the book Holacracy, and then someone gave me Reinventing Organizations, there was a paragraph sort of partway through that said, imagine if we could organize companies like natural systems. And so, given our purpose statement, the flags went up. And as John alluded to, we've grown 100% over the last 2 years and are on a trajectory to probably continue that growth over the next couple of years. And what I felt intuitively was a tension around having to organize the way that other companies organize, as versus solidifying and putting structure around and improving the way that we've organically organized to date. And then had the great privilege of connecting with Anna and sort of getting started along this journey. So teal, I think, is a way of organizing that makes sense along the line of where humanity's rising to, both in terms of consciousness and then in terms of how we organize. And so it's a big part of what we're pushing forward. And as I mentioned previously, like, we wanted to change the world, and we still do, and that's sort of at the core of what we do. But as we've grown, the theme, we just had an annual meeting, and there's a Rumi quote that says, I was clever and wanted to change the world, and then I got wise and wanted to change myself. And that's sort of our focus moving forward, is how do we develop the best systems that allows us to enhance the biosphere, local communities, and our own selves. And teal really resonated as a way to sort of provide a structure both around being a great company, but also being a company that resonates with that broader purpose.
Yeah, and I find that whenever I get distracted and have more of the idea of changing the world, the universe normally gives me a message about what I need to actually come back home to. So yeah, really appreciating that particular quote. And we said we're really going to have the opportunity to talk about decision making, because at the heart of what I think self-organizing is about is how do you make decisions? So what I wanted to, obviously there's many people on the call, 80-odd%, that have gone through the decision of actually becoming a certified B Corp. Maybe could you share a little bit about what that journey was for yourself and WasteFarmers?
The journey of becoming a B Corp?
Yeah, like the decision, the specific, how that decision was made. Was it individual? Was it collective? How did it evolve?
Yeah, so I think John will sort of speak to it. Like 3 years ago now, we were in a single wide trailer. And so the communication was really easy to make decisions.
I apologize. I was saying to make the decision to become a B Corp.
Right.
Yeah.
And then with that, we kind of said, well, we're already doing all these things. Why do we need to do it? And then we went through the assessment, and we were shocked by how much room we had to grow. But it was in terms of making the decision to do it. It was a collective. This makes sense. Let's go for it. And then John had to do all the work.
I must admit, I really love those type of decisions. They're the ones where it's like, oh, here's the decision, and we know where it's going. So with that, so that was one specific decision. Now, obviously, the decision about self-management. I'm thinking about what particular, maybe over to you, John, what particular challenges have you experienced around decision making over the years that really said, let's do something different?
Yeah, for sure. So, as John-Paul said, we were originally in a single wide trailer. So decision making, and there was, 5 of us in there at any given time, and decision making was pretty easy. I think we always, worked on a relatively consensus basis process. But when you're all sitting in a single wide trailer, it works out, and most of your buddies. It works out relatively easily, and you've got a really small production facility, and et cetera. But for us, as we grew, it became apparent that wasn't going to work anymore. I think we've grown 100% year over year since I've joined, and we've added, we just, I don't even know, we grew our production size by over tenfold in the last year. We grew our production, our production staff by tenfold in the last 2 years. So it became a lot harder for us to try to make decisions, and a lot of things were getting bottlenecked at either myself or JP, and that became a total pinch point. And as we grew, we had less and less visibility into all aspects of the company, and so it became obvious that this is not the right way to do this. Why are all decisions coming to myself or JP when we don't have visibility into everything? There's no reason why we should be making the final decision on everything anymore. And to be honest, it's a recognition that I think we came to a certain point where we recognized a lot of stuff was just falling through the cracks. Decisions were falling through the cracks. People weren't getting called back the way they were. Our clients and our vendors weren't getting treated the way they were, simply because we can only work so many hours in a week. And so it just made sense to say, look, some of this decision-making power and just the decisions in general need to be kind of decentralized, or at least peeled off into other avenues. And we didn't want to. It just when we looked at this process, it made a lot of sense for kind of how we intuitively felt, and B, how we'd already kind of organically kind of organized up until that point. It made sense to move in the direction of, I guess some kind of hybrid between teal and holacracy. So it was really just, at the end of the day, you're looking out for your customers and your ability to grow as a business, and you go, what we're doing isn't working. We got to do something different. So.
Yeah, and as that decision was forming and being made, I realized today, it sounds like in the timeline, it sounds like that's when you were entering the picture, Matt. It sounds like you were kind of walking in just as that was happening. And as I think about walking into an organization that's formalizing or implementing self-organizing, as well as with kind of this fast growth. So you've not only got upgrading systems, you've got fast growth. As now the implementation guru, what's your experience of that? How are you, like, I'm imagining you're good at catch, like you got to catch that.
Yeah, it's been a great learning process for me as I've been diving into the business. It's definitely been a whirlwind for me as I'm learning, the business in general, and also trying to see where the systems are breaking down, and how teal and holacracy, which is really the tool that we're using to move towards teal management, how we can use those tools in a way that makes sense for our business, for WasteFarmers, where we're at today, while trying to set a course for where we want to be with these tools in the future. So it's definitely a sort of work in progress, and we keep saying this to the company, to everybody that we're moving in this direction with, that we're probably not going to get it right the first time, and we're building it as we're flying. And I think in many ways, that is a really fun and exciting part of moving into these new systems. everything we try to implement has a piece that is unique to WasteFarmers and unique to us. And we are sort of all on board for this ride of figuring out how it works in the future.
Yeah, and I remember the very kind of early conversations, because there's a place of, is it strictly holacracy? Is it that? Are we going to just flip a switch and you're going to implement full on all at once? Or are you really going to kind of add practices and grow into it at the pace that the organization can really digest and make sense? And we kind of came out with a decision to go in the direction of the latter, so that you could really incorporate what was healthy, supportive, and really going to support the organization that goes forward. So I think it's that the pacing becomes in every single implementation one of the biggest pieces to be able to navigate. Is there anything that's popping up, that any of you want to share? Because we're going to kind of move in the direction a little bit of the selection criteria. So instead of talking about decision making in a theoretical way, we're going to move in the actual subject. So I'm just checking we haven't got any questions right now in the chat window. So I'll pass it over to you, Heather, if that's good with you. Oh yeah.
Can I just add one more thing to that? I guess one thing, and hopefully most of the companies that are with us today are actually growing fast as well. And I think that when you are, the big thing is always to be able to see down the line and see where those challenges come. And I guess this is a nod to JP in particular, because JP has that ability to see 6 months, a year down the line as to where the challenges are going to be, and where we're going to run into hiccups. And if you had asked me, when JP first started, well, maybe by the time JP first started bringing this up, we were all kind of like, okay, we need to do something. But the point was, he was probably thinking about it, mulling it over even before that, and recognizing that we need to do something. And I guess the point is, if you're at all considering doing anything like this, you probably need to do it. The point is that you can't start doing this kind of stuff soon enough, and to be able to just see further down the line than you think on a day-to-day basis. Otherwise, you get behind that curve. And yeah, for us, it was definitely, I guess, just to recognize one of those challenges that you brought up. There's a decision: do you do it all at once, or do you do it on the fly like we are? I think for us, part of the challenge that everybody might have doing this is that you got to keep the lights on at the same time. And if you took all your resources and worked on holacracy and teal management for 3 weeks, you might go out of business. And that was our decision, I guess. That's at least the way we looked at it. And it's important, I think, to recognize, recognize what your capacity is. Some bigger companies might have a much more capacity to peel off a division to really work on this. And for us, we all had so much on our plate already. It's like, we can't all focus on this for 2 weeks, or we'll literally go out of business. So, just to be able to think through that before you make a decision as to how you implement it.
Yeah, thanks.
I think that's a really good point, because taking this theoretical concept and going live one day with it all throughout the company, to me sounds like a pretty big pull. So starting with the bite-sized pieces and find out what works and build on that, and then roll things out, makes a lot of sense to me. So to bring it down to that specific level, today what we're going to talk about is how you go about selecting suppliers, because that's a big decision. How are we going to spend our company's money, and then the time and the good experience or the bad experience that comes through that selection process. John, I understand that you have the role in charge of supplier decisions. So I wanted to ask you, what is, if any, the supplier screening methodology that you have in place currently?
So we have I guess it's definitely not an amazingly formal process. There is no documentation sent to our suppliers before we work with them. There is an informal screening process that I go through with them to talk to them. I have, several points that we talk about in terms of, where they located. And it really does depend. We have a kind of a really broad spectrum of the type of products that we bring in. So if I think there's a potential at all for child labor in that supply chain somewhere, we have a discussion around that. We have a discussion a lot of times around different certifications. So all of our products are either OMRI listed or at least OMRI listed, if not OMRI certified. We talk about organic certification. We talk about just overall kind of we don't really hide the fact that we are a mission-driven company, I guess. And let me step back. So we work in a sector. A lot of what we do is soil manufacturing. So a lot of our supply chain, for lack of a better term, is a bit of an old boys network. So there's definitely mining and compost and things where you wouldn't go, oh, there's probably a really great consciousness level around sustainability and workers' rights and et cetera in that field. So I think it's been a bit of a challenge to have those conversations, but it obviously makes it even that much more important, I guess, to have those conversations. But I guess I just want to point that out because you're not walking into this like everybody we work with is already kind of on board. That's definitely not the case. Right. So we definitely have to weed out some for sure. So. Okay.
Well, thank you for that. And I want to ask both questions at once. What works well with the process, and do you see opportunities for strengthening that process?
Yeah. Answer the second one first. Yes, there's definitely opportunities for strengthening the process. I think what works is to not hide who you are as a business. So, make it obvious. I mean, it's apparent on our website. So if anybody ever checked out our website, they know pretty quick who we are and what our values are. But, have that conversation early on because it just makes it that much easier that if it's not going to work, it's not going to work. It's kind of like it's a relationship, right? It's kind of like getting some of that out on the first date and figuring out, hey, this isn't going to work. We're going in different directions. But at the same time, some of the suppliers that are potentially challenging are opportunities too to bring into the fold. I guess that's one way to look at it. And sometimes you're caught in a situation where you only have one supplier. Maybe we're going to get into this, but you have to make a decision. Well, there's this supplier that's really close, and so the carbon footprint of this supplier and the cost fits really, really well. And the other supplier that we might like slightly better in terms of our mission is another 3,000 miles away. So it's just not going to work. So you're forced into the situation where you kind of have to try to bring that first supplier into the fold. Try to have a big enough buying power that you can kind of get them at least somewhat on your page.
That's a really good point. And we're going to talk about those criteria, and sometimes when those criteria conflict with one another, and how do you figure out which one outweighs the other. But before we get into that specific decision-making process, we do have a poll question. Tanya, if you could do poll number 2. We want to find out where, if the people on the call share your same level of experience with supplier screening, or if they don't have a supplier screening process in place yet. So I'll give a minute for this poll to be answered. And more than one option is available.
John, I'd be curious to know what our answer is.
There was about 3 or 4 on there. I just hit save. Actually, I don't have it in front of me anymore. But
me too. When it gets published, we'll be able to. I was just trying to remember the options.
Yeah, the options were: do you have a positive screening tool, negative screening tool, and you talked a little bit about both.
Right.
by far most people answered we're selective, but we don't have a formal process in place.
And I would say that's probably true for us. Like I said, we don't send like if you work with Whole Foods, we sell to Whole Foods, and Whole Foods sends a very large pamphlet over that we have to go through. It's a very formal screening process that they do, and we don't have something like that. But we do, it's basically me having conversations.
Okay. So then one thing that I've found to be a very useful tool, and this can be initiated with prospective suppliers, so like going here forward, or you could apply it to existing suppliers as well to learn more about them. And the reason why you might want to learn more about your existing suppliers, for all of us B Corps out there, is in general, the more you know about your suppliers, the more likelihood there is that your score is going to be that much higher, because you can answer more of the questions and you'll know more about their practices, and in turn you can deepen your impact by being more selective around these potentially important criteria. And sometimes it is easier to start small, so starting with prospective suppliers from here on out. So really there's a lot of latitude with how you would choose to implement this. So the tool that I'm just gonna call it the grid. Its official name is the multi-criteria decision-making matrix, but that's kind of a mouthful, so I'm just calling it the grid. And there's a way to compare your suppliers through multiple criteria and come up with a weighted ranking that really helps you balance out which of those competing criteria outweigh and collectively outweigh to make the biggest bang for your buck type decision that you can. And so when we think about the selection criteria, there is an incredibly long list of things that you could consider. And I've put together a little bit of a list. It's not exhaustive, but there it is. I hope everybody can see that. Can you confirm? You can see that? Okay, good. And so among these criteria, you've got some logistical type criteria like shipping distance, turnaround time, quality, cost, and some of those things are pretty straightforward. Some of the other criteria that we want to look at would be, and you alluded to this, John, are they mission aligned? With our specific mission, do they resonate with us? Do they treat employees fairly? Do they give back to their community? Are they working to be more environmentally responsible? And the list could go on for what criteria you might use in your selection process. So I wanted to have a little bit of a discussion around, for you at WasteFarmers, and any of the three of you could answer this, which of these criteria would be probably in your top 5 list?
I guess I'll jump in. So let's see. Oh man, definitely shipping distance is in there, but I will say that it's also shipping method for us, because there's, like, I'll give a perfect example, or well, hopefully a good example. So one of our products comes from overseas, comes from India. And we can ship that product on a boat, on a cargo ship, or and then put it on a train in LA and get it to us. Or we could potentially ship that product out of Mexico, or at least we're trying to work on a source out of there. But part of the decision there is, if it comes out of Mexico, it's coming on a truck all the way from southern Mexico. And so the carbon impact, or the carbon footprint of a truck from southern Mexico versus a ship from India and a rail line from LA, somebody's got to do the calculations on that, but it's something that we look at. So it's not just the distance, but definitely the method as well. Third-party certification is growing as a higher one for sure, because like right now we're switching one of our main suppliers over from, we're switching basically one of our largest suppliers, because The other supplier has a certification around child labor laws, which we're very concerned about with this one particular input. So I guess part of this is, it really is totally input dependent. We know that for our main input, it is potentially, it could potentially come from child labor. So that's something that for that input, we want to pay very close attention to that issue on. Whereas some of our other inputs, it's not going to happen. But other third-party certifications, like I was mentioning earlier, bottle breach certification or certified organic, B Corp, although there's not so many in our supply chain right now, we're pushing some of them to go that direction. Cost is always one. It's hard to say that is not in the top 5. But I will say this: there's definitely cheaper suppliers out there than probably almost all of our suppliers. But so we kind of, I think, bump quality above cost. For us, we kind of have to weigh both of those, but quality kind of trumps cost at the end of the day for us. And I'm not sure if I hit 5 yet, but
I think you're right about there.
I'm right around there. Recycled inputs is a no-brainer for us. Pretty much all of our products are coming from, or almost all of our products come from some recycled input. So, yeah. Oh, and then the gut feeling is actually a really big one. I'm maybe it's just because I'm Italian, but I go on gut feeling a lot with suppliers for sure. It's I ask a question, can I come to your facility? And if they say no, then we don't work with them. I want to know that I can trust them and work with them and hang out with them and have a good relationship with them, because I want to be able to talk about mission and et cetera. And if I don't think I can talk to them about that kind of stuff, then I'm not going to work with them. So
I think that is really good. And I think we have a raised hand question.
Yeah, we do. So I apologize, the person that raised their hand. We had a couple of things. So one is, I'm going to talk about, there was a question that was sent through in the Q&A, which is, how can you ensure that your supply chain comply with the B Corp requirements if there is no formal screening of suppliers? It seems difficult to achieve. And I would say it's actually impossible. So that's why the importance of this. So I answered that offline. But yeah, if we could have the person see if their audio is working and they can ask their question live.
Okay, so Andrea was the person who had her hand raised, and I have, there we go, promoted her to panelist to be able to talk.
Great. Hi, Andrea.
You're on mute, Andrea.
Oh.
I had joined a little bit late in terms of seeing the screen, and I was on my phone and I wasn't sure how this all worked, but I did raise my hand wondering whether or not, this is more administrative than anything, we're going to get a copy of the PowerPoint.
Perfect.
Yep.
Yeah.
And my answer is yes, absolutely. We can share this. We'll send it out to everybody who's registered. And is that your full question?
Yeah.
Actually,
all right.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, because I'm sure many people were asking the same thing. So thank you for that, Andrea.
Yeah. And so to continue the conversation with John then, so you've talked about what your instinct would be for what top 5 of these criteria would apply. And in your organization, you have been sort of knighted to implement those criteria and to judge which suppliers to go with based on the criteria. And as groups, sometimes in organizations, you will want to have, you'll have one person who's trusted and mission aligned to do that. Other times you might have an organization where you want a working group to come to an agreement on what the top criteria are. And so, Anna, I'm turning this over to you for a moment to talk about the different decision-making methods that one could use to narrow down this list of criteria?
Yeah, so this would be in any type of organization, because in a self-organizing organization, you're looking more to have one point of contact. So who is the decision maker? They may have ways of gathering data and integrating other people's feedback, or a higher level, which is integrating their objections if they feel like the decision's going to cause harm or move us backwards. So that's a whole separate process in and of itself. But that would be one person still making the decision while they integrate others' information. So I would look at that as leader decides with input. We see leaders as everyone as a leader. So each role has decision-making authority within it. And either the leader decides, the leader of that role, or the leader decides with input from others. And then there are these others. So I'll touch on them first quickly, and then I'll move over to John with the specific question about his situation. If it is a larger situation where there's a lot of input, and it could actually be a subgroup decides, and that could be, using all sorts of different mechanisms, but the actual subgroup decides. It could be a subgroup, but they really need to go out to the whole organization and get all sorts of input. Something that a lot of people are familiar with is majority vote. That can be dissatisfying. It can create certain outcomes and decisions that people do not enjoy, because majority vote kind of then just casts the people that are in the minority aside, and it doesn't really integrate their information effectively. Some people choose consensus. I think consensus is something that really needs looking at. What does consensus mean? Is it a process of integrating people's information, their feedback, their objections, but that people can't just block? Because consensus can be, if handled ineffectively without a really clear process, can actually be enormously time consuming and not effective. But if you have very good consent mechanisms, then it can be workable. But what I like to look at in any type of organization, is it consensus with fallback? Because if you, with consensus, you need to put a timeline on it to get to a decision, because otherwise it could be open-ended and just go on. And are you falling back to leader decides with input? Where are you falling back to? Which of these decision-making methods? And if it's full-on consensus, which personally, I only have a very specific definition of how we do consensus, so it does not bog people down. And within holacracy, it's called integrated decision-making process, which therefore is not consensus. It's a very formalized process, but it does incorporate everyone's input and everyone's valid objections. And so first thing I always look at is, if you're talking about criteria, who actually decides? So let's go and look at John and say, right now, as you currently stand, what one of these mechanisms do you use to make this decision?
I would say right now it's leader with input. Yeah, I mean, right now, there's a lot of input into quality from sales, for sure. And then there's definitely input from the production crew around certain aspects of what we use. And, to be honest, like the other input is just the mission. So the mission is obviously something that we all espouse to and kind of advance in our daily work. And so that has a big impact, I guess, on or a big input into what I know that, for instance, I know if I make a decision that totally falls outside the mission, I'm going to hear about it for sure from somebody within the company that, like, why are we sourcing from that guy uses X, Y, and Z, or that company is terrible about this, so yeah, I'd say right now, I guess that sums it up as a leader with input.
Great. And this sounds, what I love about this particular slide, or looking at these methods, is what we suggest is that when a decision emerges in an organization, it doesn't matter what one it is. Is it who's going to implement self-organizing, who's deciding criteria? What are you doing now once you've decided on the criteria? Who's got the authority to now actually select and use that criteria? The minute a decision emerges, the first question is, do you know who has the authority to decide? And that protocol, whether you are in whatever the type of structure your organization is, that question can save so much time. I was in a workshop the other day and somebody said, I think it's going to save 20% of my time by just clarifying that right up front of who decides and how we're going to decide. Because if we do that actually in 5 minutes, make that decision, the who and the how, everybody knows how they're showing up in the conversation. So that's all I'm going to say for now on that, and I'll go back over to you, Heather.
Thank you for that. And that's a perfect segue into, okay, now that you have your selected criteria list winnowed down to something manageable, this is the grid, the tool that I talked about a few minutes ago, where across the top you would put in your selected criteria. And you can even put a weighting on some of these criteria, where if cost is your most important thing, you can give that one 2 times weighting, for example, and all the rest are weighted at 1. And so what you do with this is you compare your selected suppliers or your competing suppliers, supplier A, B, and C, and I just hypothetically picked some of the criteria to put across the top, and you go cell by cell, and you input a value into each cell that describes how well that particular supplier meets that one criteria. And so you would use a 5 for highly desirable. So it might be that low cost is highly desirable, so a lower cost would put a 5. A 3 is moderately desirable, and a 1 would be undesirable or not applicable if it doesn't apply to that particular cell. And then you go across in that way and just assign a quick gut level feeling of how well, or data-based feeling about how well each supplier, what number belongs in each cell of that grid. And then once it's all filled out, you just simply add the numbers across and it gives you a weighting. And so again, hypothetical example here. This is a quick way to evaluate each supplier based on your selected criteria. In this example, all of the criteria have equal weighting. And so you just add the numbers up across, and you can see that in this hypothetical example, supplier B meets more of the criteria more of the time. And so that would be the supplier that you would most likely go with based on these particular criteria. Now, if you have, just a terrible gut feeling about that particular supplier, listen to that. I mean, the gut feeling part is, you could have gut feeling as one of your criteria here and give a quantitative ranking to that as well, if that's really important to you in your organization. This gives you not an absolute answer, but rather a guideline to follow. Does this make sense to everybody?
Maybe I'm the only one that's confused. So say supplier A cost at 5, does that mean, I guess, are these numbers ranking your priority of these issues, or is it ranking them in terms of relation to cost? So supplier A has the best cost, but they only do moderately well on women minority owned?
Yeah, so maybe they have lowest cost, that is a correct interpretation. Okay. And maybe they are partially women or minority owned, so that's why they're in the middle on the 3 there. If you had quality, as one of your criteria, obviously the 5 would be the highest quality, the most desirable.
But there's no way in this to rank that cost is to you more important than women minority owned or vice versa. Is that correct?
In this example,
no
they're all given equal weighting.
Equal weighting. Okay.
But yeah, you could give
I
cost,
see.
for example, 2 times weight.
Gotcha.
And so that box would actually be a 10.
Okay, and the one below it would be 6, and the one below that would be 6.
Correct.
Okay,
yes.
gotcha.
Thank you for the questions.
Yeah, that's great.
Cool.
That one is a little counterintuitive when it's, you know, the low cost is the higher number.
So just to kind of, because we're going to be rounding up here. I thought, Heather, do we want to just finish up with a question out to the panelists? And then at 1 o'clock, we'll be stopping the recording. Anyone that wants to stay on for the information about the last webinar can do so. But I think that's where we'll go. Is that good with you?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, one of the things that I always love to ask is, if it's a prioritization question, is what keeps you up at night? And so maybe as we were talking about decision making and self-organizing, either you can, here's an either or question, you can tell about what keeps you up at night, or if you've got any recommendation that you want to put out to the audience. And so choose one or the other. It'll only be kind of a 40-second closing round. We'll start with who wants to go first. John-Paul, we'll put you on the spot. What keeps you up at night, or any recommendation?
My new baby girl, Poppy, keeps me up at night. And then I think just staying authentic to our mission with the constraints of growth and the realities of capital. That kind of keeps me up at night.
Beautiful. I love that. Thank you. I'll go John. I'll go you next.
Yeah, I guess what keeps me up at night is trying to keep the wheels on without things busting apart as we grow, I guess. I know that encompasses a whole lot of stuff, but yeah, just trying to make sure that we don't drive so hard that things fall off the train, I guess. So yeah.
Great, thank you. And Matt, you'll have the final word out of your guys. What keeps you up at night? Or
yeah, I guess just to reiterate, you know, not letting, you know, I think the systems are really critical to growing and to being successful in a really fast growing business, but also not letting systems get in the way of just getting the work done. And that, I think, is both a reminder to myself and something that keeps me up at night, and hopefully a good reminder to everybody else on the call. So trying to just, you know, find a solution that fits where you're at as a company and can evolve as you grow the company.
That's beautiful. Well, I thank you all for participating. I will say the temporary goodbye to everyone so that we can end before we answer any questions from the last time, and then final word over to you, Heather.
Well, I want to thank everybody for being here, and for all 3 of you, John-Paul, John, and Matt, for playing along. And hopefully the decision grid, you know, it can be a useful tool as you put in controls in certain places, and to know that decisions will be made in a way that you agree with, so that you can then let go of control of that decision. So thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I believe that Tanya is actually going to end the recording so that we can start a new recording for the final piece, where we're just talking about some of the homework or some of the reflection exercises that we gave last time. So if anyone wants to drop off, they can. And now we will